Hello everybody, my name's Shizue, and in my last video I went over how there was an entire video's worth that I could cover going over the identity of Glitchtrap. And I believe a lot of information was actually given to us during the events of Secret of the Mimic, as well as multiple details scattered throughout all of the modern era that should give us some clues into who this character really is. As many of you might know, it's been popular belief for a while now to a lot of people that Glitchtrap was actually just William Afton, and that he had returned from the dead possessing some sort of code that would allow him to persist within inside of reality. But I don't think this is the case, and Secret of the Mimic seems to solidify this. Going into Secret of the Mimic, distinctly in the bad ending of the game, we are actually shown our character be killed by the Mimic and wake up inside of a Freddy Fazbear costume as we see the Mimic stare at us and perform a Showtime performance. We've actually seen this ending before inside of Help Wanted. However, inside of Help Wanted, this was the actual FNAF 1 location instead of the prototype location like we see inside of this game, as well as instead of M2 staring at us, it appears to be Glitchtrap. This seems to make some sort of connection between the Mimic, M2, and Glitchtrap, and to a lot of people this was direct confirmation of the two characters being the exact same. This is even doubled down during the events of the Help Wanted 2 DLC, in which, by killing Glitchtrap in the original game, we actually start to see small pieces from the past start showing up, such as MCM logos appearing, us being able to see the physical Mimic inside of the showcases, as well as a white tiger plushie returning by inputting the numbers 1979. With all of this evidence stacked together, it seems to really suggest that M2, the character we were fighting off against during the events of Secret of the Mimic the entire time, is our main antagonist and is Glitchtrap. However, there are a few issues I have with that being the pure answer to what's going on. Looking at M2 as we're shown inside of the events of Security Breach Ruin, the character looks very different. He seemed to have had a lot of his pieces replaced, in which we see that his chest cavity has been destroyed. In Ending 3, we were shown that this is how you reprogram a character, so if this thing no longer works, then that means that M2 can no longer be reprogrammed. The character is thinking for his own. He can no longer be converted into a singular identity. And so, the Glitchtrap persona doesn't really work here because unlike what we're shown with Gregory and other characters, the Mimic wouldn't genuinely believe it was William Afton in this moment because it can no longer be reprogrammed into being that way. It would only utilize William Afton as a disguise. It also contains multiple other errors, such as the fact that why didn't Glitchtrap just use Vanessa to help M2 leave the basement? It seems like something that would have been incredibly easy to do, but instead, it utilizes Vanessa to convert M2 into the burn trap that we see inside of Security Breach. This feels a little weird unless this Glitchtrap is something more than just M2 and is thinking differently than he is. And we're even shown this inside of Security Breach Ruin, where distinctly the character Helpy, who appears to be Glitchtrap, as Helpy is connected to the Glitchtrap several times throughout the events of Help Wanted 2, and Ruin. However, in this situation, Helpy argues with M2, who's pretending to be Gregory inside of this moment. This felt like a weird thing unless these two characters aren't the exact same. However, this left me kind of confused. Why is there so many pieces of evidence saying that this is M2, but there are things that rationally cannot make this M2? The only way that this would be able to work is if somehow there were two versions of the M2 program. If only there was an example of this occurring before. Well, actually, inside of Secret of the Mimic, we're distinctly told that the Mimic program originated as one singular program. It observed the memory of Fiona and tried to replicate her to become the perfect babysitter for David. We're later told that the way that M2 was created was that M1 was taken out of the Mimic's body, placed inside of the supercomputer, then a duplicate was placed back inside of the body. This body would then be programmed into David and believe that it was David. This would be M2. Essentially, it would mean that the Mimic 1 program is still running through M2, however, due to the dataset, it has become a much different character than the original Mimic program. Theoretically, if we were to do the same exact thing, if someone were to take the M2 program, separate it from M2's body, and then use it with its own new dataset, then presumably it would contain still the memories of M2 and M1, just like M2 did. However, it would also contain a new set of memory that would have come with that new dataset that M2 never observed. observed. This would be a theoretical M3 that would have been utilized by Fazbear Entertainment. This would explain why the two characters aren't behaving and having the exact same goals. It's because, while they are running on the same exact code, one is containing a dataset that the other never had. This dataset obviously being influenced by Fazbear Entertainment and William Afton in some way, which explains why this M3 is somehow behaving differently than M2 does. While it still has the main goal of setting M2 free, it now also wants to become one with Afton, which begs the question, why exactly is it behaving like this? Well, we're actually shown this kind of in Secret of the Mimic as well. By getting New Games Plus and completing the Moon.exe minigame, we can unlock something called the Glitched Permission. Utilizing it, we're able to access rooms inside of the Murray house that we were unable to access before. By going into these rooms, we end up finding audio files. We collect 6 of these files and place them inside of a cassette tape player, and we make our way into David's room, where we see a stand with a set of 6 buttons. These buttons corresponding to Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Bub, and Monty. We then have to place the Tiger Rock plush on top of it, which will then allow us to reprogram the Mimic. By playing the audio files within the correct order, we can convert the M2, who's been confused about what its purpose and who its character is meant to be, into just David, essentially putting him back together. When we take a look at Help Wanted 2, we're shown this exact same thing, except instead of the audio files, there are 6 objects that are used to create the Glitchtrap. Those 6 objects being a set of 6 plushies, that being Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Fredbear, and the Marionette. By collecting all of these plushies and putting them in the correct order, we're able to get Glitchtrap in his physical form, that being the Glitchtrap plushie, and we're able to give it to Vanny, which she then destroys, showing that Glitchtrap is made from these 6 plushies, similar to the way that David was made up of those 6 audio tapes. The weird thing is, those tapes that are used to create David are specifically a story being told by both Edwin and Fiona together in unison. This is what is able to create the perfect David. So then begs the question, what do these plushies actually represent that they would be able to create a perfect representation of William Afton? While some would be quick to assume these plushies are meant to somehow represent William Afton himself, I don't think that's the case, because we've actually seen this representation before, during the events of the Into the Pit game. Into the Pit game, we play as a character named Oswald who goes to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. By jumping inside of the ball pit, he's traveled back into the memory of the missing children's incident, in which, by going into the back room, following a yellow rabbit creature, he ends up finding a set of 6 kids. A lot of people were under the assumption that these 6 kids had to be the missing children and a character from the novels known as Andrew. However, it could be possible that this 6th kid was actually intended to be the Marionette the entire time, which would match up with the pattern of 6 we've seen scattered throughout Five Nights at Freddy's for a while now, all the way back in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, showing back up in Five Nights at Freddy's 6, and obviously in Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2. Similar to how Into the Pit shows that it was these 6 kids' memories that created the yellow thing, this yellow rabbit that behaves and speaks like William Afton, despite being a nightmare creature created of memory, it makes a lot of sense how the Glitchtrap would have came to be. He would essentially be the same thing, where the memories of those children, how they perceived William Afton, would come together and form one single being, a yellow rabbit monster creature. That's exactly what Glitchtrap is. So essentially, Glitchtrap would be the fusion of the M2 program that's been separated from the M2 body, and the memories of the missing children's incident and the puppet fusing together to create one entity. This might be a little confusing since the missing children are presumed to have moved on after the events of FNAF 6, however, as we've been shown via the novels, just because a person's moved on does not mean that their memories or their agony has moved on just yet, as the character Michael Brooks specifically gives his memories to Carlton in order to keep him alive, despite the fact that Michael and all the other missing children in that story end up passing on. This shows that memories can still persist inside of the living world even after that person has moved on. So while the missing children all moved on thanks to the Happiest Day minigame, their memories and their agony still persist inside of the location that they all went to rest, that being the FNAF 6 location. We were told in Help Wanted that they had specifically used old circuit boards and things that they scanned together. If these memories and this agony was all fused into the circuit boards of all of the machines that were left behind inside of Freddy Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, then fusing with the old M3 chip, then it would create the Glitchtrap. It's a perfect explanation to that character, and line up with exactly what Scott Cawthon said in his second interview, distinctly calling Glitchtrap the possession of technology. And it would also explain some other details that a lot of people have been confused about, distinctly the events of FNAF AR, where we can hear Springtrap utilize lines that he would have only heard if they were able to get the memories of Ultimate Custom Night and somehow brought them to life, as that information is not something that anyone in the real world would have been able to know. The only person that would have heard the information inside of Ultimate Custom Night, specifically those voice lines, would be William Afton, or the one you should not have killed torturing him. I would even go as far as to say that they've been hinting towards this for a while now, specifically utilizing the character of Nightmarionne. We were told a while back that Nightmarionne in the events of the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 Halloween edition were not canon. This means that that character, as it was represented in FNAF 4, was most likely not entirely accurate. However, the character has made reappearances since then, distinctly as the face of Ultimate Custom Night, which always felt weird, and has also been making reappearances with inside of the modern era. It first appeared inside of Help Wanted as a character physically inside of the game, which was a little weird for a character who was not canon. However, we would later be told, thanks to Security Breach Ruin, that this character actually originated from the VR game, just like Glitchtrap did. We've been seeing utilizations of this characterization via the plushies that have been hidden throughout the events of Security Breach, as well as the staff bots that have been having the exact same face and design as Nightmarionne, and distinctly saying things like "in your dreams" written on the chest plate. However, the character hasn't been referred to Nightmarionne inside of these situations. It's been referred to as the Nightmare, which is the name of a character in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, distinctly that of a reversed version of Golden Freddy in a nightmare form during the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. We found out via the files that this character was actually just Shadow Freddy, which directly connects the Nightmarionne to Shadow Freddy, something I actually talked about inside of that last video. Paying attention to the voice lines in Ultimate Custom Night as to what these characters are meant to be, we're distinctly told via Nightmarionne that it is the fearful reflection of what William Afton has created, and William Afton specifically refers to his possession of the animatronics as his creations, thus meaning that Nightmarionne is a fearful reflection of the puppet's death. Add that on with Nightmare referring to itself as William Afton's wickedness given flesh, it seems to suggest that Nightmare and Nightmarionne are meant to be these sort of shadow creatures born of the pain that William Afton inflicted on the kids all those years ago. Interestingly enough, this character actually has appeared before, known as Elleanor inside of the Fazbear Frights novels, and is directly tied to the ball pit where the yellow thing and the missing children's incident are all connected to. This character goes around specifically leaving objects inside of the real world to cause more pain and agony, because it feeds on this dark energy, and thanks to Secret of the Mimic seemingly suggesting that the books are not one-to-one with the games, then that would imply that Elleanor can exist within inside of the game's timeline in a different form than the way that she appeared in the Fazbear Frights novels. I believe that the way that Elleanor is being personified inside of the games is via the Nightmarionne character. Nightmarionne is meant to represent the agony that William Afton has inflicted, specifically choosing the puppet as its reflection because the puppet was the first victim that William Afton ever took, and therefore it is taking his face in order to represent all of the pain and agony that William Afton has caused throughout the entire series, and that this character is specifically what fuses with the M3 chip via the circuit boards being scanned by Fazbear Entertainment that creates the Glitchtrap. This would explain why Nightmarionne has started making appearances, as well as Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie in the more recent games. Interestingly enough, inside of the novels, Shadow Bonnie is also shown to be a benevolent character inside of the events of Fazbear Frights, and a lot of people have misconstrued a lot of its actions as something that's been helpful towards the missing children. However, a lot of people were confused about Shadow Freddy as well, as they originally interpreted Shadow Freddy as someone that was helping the missing children in order to find their killer. However, FNAF 6 would confirm that Shadow Freddy was actually actually benevolent and was being utilized by William Afton in order to lure the kids away. The Shadow Bonnie, not to be confused with the character that appears inside of the Happiest Day minigames, is distinctly connected to Agony during the events of FNAF AR, where Dark Remnant, which most people interpret to be Agony, by collecting too much of it, we end up seeing the Shadow Bonnie appear, a character that would be tied to Agony, because Shadow Bonnie, Shadow Freddy, and the Nightmarionne are all the same exact character, just in different forms, representing the different events that William Afton is specifically tied to. So, with Nightmarionne, representing the dark memories of Fazbear Entertainment, all of the pain and agony that William Afton has ever committed, being personified via the M2 chip, it was able to create Glitchtrap, an essentially new Mimic AI, different from Mimic 2. Despite them both having the same goal of trying to get the Mimic out, M3 has an additional goal of trying to fuse its personalities with the person that it believes itself to be. Because it was fed data of all of the painful, agonizing memories that William Afton had created via the missing children's incident, the character now wishes to fuse with William Afton in order to become one whole being. This is why we distinctly see the Burn Trap, a spring trap suit, on top of the Mimic during the events of Security Breach. However, after the Glitch Trap is somewhat weakened via the events of Help Wanted 2, Mimic 2 is able to escape from his pod and removes William Afton's corpse from his body, leaving just M2. We know for a fact that the Mimic and Burn Trap are the same exact character via both the ending shown in Security Breach and the Scooper ending shown in Security Breach Ruin, where matching up the animations between Burn Trap being picked up by the Blob and the Mimic being picked up by the Scooper, they are almost exactly 1-to-1, which clearly shows us that we were on the right path in saying that Burn Trap and M2 were the same body, while also showing some sort of connection between the Blob and the Scooper. Another popular belief is that the Blob is simply just Molten Freddy in the modern day. However, the character is much too large to just be Molten Freddy, as was shown back in the original Five Nights at Freddy's 6. As Five Nights at Freddy's 6, the character was specifically made up of the 5 missing children. However, this character is much larger and appears to be made up of a lot more than just 6 kid souls. Rather, I feel like the connection between the Blob and the Scooper should be obvious, especially considering Security Breach has a missing child's plotline added on with the plotline of FNAF AR, which the entire point is that we are collecting Remnant for Fazbear Entertainment. I feel like the simple explanation here is that Fazbear was releasing animatronics to go and collect children to convert into Remnant, which then would be put inside of the Scooper. However, all of that Remnant came together into one amalgamation, which then created what we now know as the Blob. This would explain why the Blob is specifically made up of characters that all appear in FNAF AR. The one counter-argument, of course, being the puppet's mask, which seems to appear inside of the Blob. However, by looking inside of the trailers, you would know that Lefty was actually intended to be one of the characters in FNAF AR, and, as a lot of people know, Lefty distinctly has the puppet inside of him, thus meaning that all of the characters present inside of the Blob are all characters that also are connected to FNAF AR. This doesn't mean that the Molten Freddy can't contain the souls of the missing children incident. However, it feels like the more appropriate understanding of this would be that the souls from the missing children in the modern era are what are possessing the Blob, rather than the missing children from the older era. And considering that the AR animatronics are specifically made up of this M3's code, that would sort of imply that the Blob is meant to represent a Molten Freddy for the Mimic, rather than being William Afton's Molten Freddy. Of course, the second most popular interpretation of what the Blob was meant to represent was the staff of the Pizzaplex. However, I feel like the more easier interpretation for what happened to the staff is simply what we're shown via Help Wanted 2. In Help Wanted 2, we're presumably playing as Cassie's father, who ends up trapped inside of the mask bot at the end of Help Wanted 2. This seems to suggest that all of the staff members, particularly the ones that went to the all-staff party mentioned in Security Breach, would all then be murdered, and their souls would go on to possess the staff bots that we see scattered throughout Security Breach and Security Breach Ruin. This would explain why the staff bots also seem to have weird, ghostly abilities that normal animatronics wouldn't be able to have. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I think this is a pretty simple explanation to what Glitchtrap is meant to be. I know that a lot of these ideas were actually actually covered by a few of my friends while I was scripting this video. I ended up watching a few of their videos and realizing that flip side, and a few other creator friends of mine actually came to some similar conclusions, so I'll make sure to leave their videos inside of the description below so that you can go check them out, and I hope you all will show them some love as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to like it, subscribe if you want to see more videos, especially since I'm working on a timeline right now, and I'll see you all again soon. Mata ne!